You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is February 12th, 2024, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And today we have a special show. We have Jim Lakely. He is a vice president at the Heartland Institute, and we're going to be talking with him about voter fraud and some work they've done on that, and also the World Economics Forum, because that happened a few weeks back, and so we wanted to touch on that. And I know they have some very specific opinions about some of that stuff as well.
So, yeah, one or two.
Yeah, so it's it'll be a great conversation. So we're going to dive into that stuff and some of the implications of it. But before we do, let me introduce you to the rest of our panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have our screaming eagle of freedom, Tim Everett. He is a pilot in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite. He is he's a retired engineer in the state of California.
Damn, Jason. Lord have mercy.
So anyway, yeah, I got to get that secretary here to help me out with all this stuff that we were talking about earlier. But anyway,
you need an intern. Yeah,
there you go, intern. And my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. So right away, one of the biggest things we want to talk about is let's start off. We'll go to the Heartland web page here real quick. So the Heartland. Jim, you've been on the show before, but do you want to give our viewers a little bit of a background on what the Heartland's all about?
Sure. The Heartland Institute, we're a free market think tank. Some people classify us as libertarian, others calls us conservative. We're definitely on the right. We believe in the power of free markets and capitalism and in protecting as maximum individual liberty. And we've been fighting for those things on principle this is our 40th year. We were founded in 1984. We are headquartered for most of those 40 years. We were headquartered in the very city of Chicago. We escaped that place, and we now have an office in the northwest suburbs of Chicago where we're slightly safer, but still in Illinois. So we're still in a bit of a blue hellscape, but we fight from there for liberty for everybody across the country and, in fact, around the world.
Yeah, you guys have that Bluetopian blues going on over there, just like we do here in California.
Bluetopia, that's good, yeah. And I also want to point out to your listeners, you guys kind of caught me after hours today because I'm in Central Time and you're in California. So I'm going to have some adult beverages. This is a frothy beer, and I endeavor to drink it more convincingly than Elizabeth Warren. Go ahead, continue. Let's go.
Is that a high carbon beer too, or a low carbon beer?
That would be a high carbon beer.
Anybody's wondering. Okay.
Yeah.
I have my chamomile tea, so it's called Sleepy Time tea with no caffeine. So if I fall asleep during this podcast, you'll know why.
Okay. So one of the things I guess by the way, too, we had also interviewed Jim about a year ago, and you can find out a little bit more in depth about the Heartland Institute by going to listen to that podcast as well in our archives. And maybe you'll also find out what initially rang Jim's Liberty Bell there, too. So that's one of the questions we usually ask our guests. But anyways, the big issue that we wanted to talk about is that, I mean, obviously a lot of us have concerns about voter fraud going into the upcoming election, and certainly 2020 was a unique election to say the least.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see some data from inquisitive minds like those at the Heartland Institute. You guys have worked with Rasmussen on a poll to try and gauge if there were problems with people, in this absentee balloting stuff, because that was one of the crazy things with the lockdowns, right? Is that suddenly we had all these new rules foisted upon us, and not much time to really stress test these things, to see. And maybe that was by intention. Who knows?
Yes. Yes.
You think?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so you guys did a study, and let's see. So I'm gonna James, can you bring up the study here, because this is what they have at their webpage, so you could check this out. It's a study on the poll that they did, and it said who really won the election in 2020, and essentially they really looked. They asked a lot of questions to people, about the procedures they followed, and did you, sign for other people? Did you, essentially fill out other people's ballots and send them in? And so, Jim, did you want to give us a little bit of background about what you guys found out in this particular study that you guys did?
Yeah, so there's actually two parts. So we did a poll that we released back in December that we did with Rasmussen Reports, one of the most accurate and reputable polling outfits in the United States. And we polled 1,085 likely voters from around the country in a scientific poll from Rasmussen that had the respondents equally weighted as far as the electorate is concerned, with Democrats and Republicans and independents. It had the correct racial makeup of the country, men and women, all of those things. The way a polling company scientifically gets a gauge of public opinion, whether it's politics or anything else. And so we decided to ask, because we had been thinking about this for a while. And we're wondering, is it possible to poll, to craft a poll that would expose or reveal voter fraud? And because the 2020 election was the first one in history in which it was mass mailing of mail-in ballots under the pretext that COVID was so dangerous to fellow humans that while you could go to the grocery store and play tennis and go to your kid's swim meet and go to the pharmacy, you can't go to a polling place and vote. That's too dangerous. We have to mail everybody a ballot. The living, the dead, and often in multiple parts for each person. And so we decided, I'm from Chicago, so we know very well about that. And so we decided to ask questions such as some of our questions were, well, first of all, what's great about this poll is that the first question was, did you vote by mail in the 2020 election? So the answer, if you didn't answer yes to that, we'll find somebody else. But we asked questions like, did a friend or family member fill out your ballot in part or in full on your behalf? And 19% said yes. And that's not always voter fraud, but it is often voter fraud. Here's something that is definitely voter fraud. We asked if you filled out a ballot for an election in which you are not a permanent resident of that state. That, by any definition, for the most part, is election fraud. You're not allowed to do that. You're supposed to vote in the state of your residence, not vote somewhere where you don't live. 21% of people in this survey self-admitted to a stranger on the telephone, a pollster, that they voted in a state where they're no longer a permanent resident. 17% of people who responded to this in this survey said they signed a ballot for a friend or a family member, quote, with or without his or her permission. You're not supposed to sign somebody else's name, even if they're a friend or your spouse or your grandmother, to a ballot. That's something that the person who gets the ballot is supposed to do. And in fact, mail-in ballots, people think there's different rules here. Jason, I can't send you into the polling place in my neighborhood and say, I don't feel like going in there. Why don't you go in there and vote for me? This is exactly the same thing in principle. When the mail-in ballot comes to you, you should only get one of them, and you should fill it out and you should sign it. You should, ideally have a witness and then send it in. But what we found as we asked these questions, and we didn't say explicitly, this action is a crime. We just described the action. So some of these people may have done it by accident. And I think a lot of people probably did it on purpose and purposely committed voter fraud. But what we found is that more than 1 in 4 mail-in ballots constituted some sort of voter fraud. And it was a shocking poll. When this came out in December, it made news everywhere. It was on Mark Levin's show. It was on the Mike Gallagher show. Jesse Waters did a segment on it on Fox. It was everywhere. And so we decided, you know what? Okay, let's take this poll and let's apply it to the swing states, the states that were so narrowly decided in the 2020 election. And so we took the data and we analyzed it and crunched it down. We took many, many weeks to do this, quadruple checked twice our numbers to make sure that we were doing this correctly. And those swing states were Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. And so when we did that, we applied what I would call different levels of voter fraud. So, we've actually had some pushback from friends of ours who say, come on, man, there's no way that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 mail-in ballots were fraud and should have been thrown away. And we're like, yeah, that sounds crazy, but that's the answer to the poll. We were as shocked as everybody else. Rasmussen was blown away. They'd never seen anything like this in their life. And they've been doing this for a long time. So we decided, all right, if you think that may have been overstated or people may have overstated themselves by accident, let's bring that level of fraud from 24 down to 15% and apply it to the states where the election was very close. What would happen then? Well, if the level of fraud, instead of being 24% in Pennsylvania, was 15%, Trump wins Pennsylvania. Biden doesn't win Pennsylvania. And he also wins all the other states, the swing states as well. What if we brought that down to 10%? Trump wins all those states as well. What if it was 5%? Now you're telling me that there's no way that 5% of the ballots that should have been that were mailed in all of these states couldn't have been thrown away? That is a pretty typical, actually, rejection rate, maybe a little bit above in a normal election in which the percentage of mail-in votes is much, much smaller than it was in this election. This was by far the largest mail-in election in American history. At 5%, Donald Trump is reelected president of the United States and Joe Biden isn't. And so this is just the beginning, I think, of what should be and can be and must be a national conversation to get our election laws straight, to make our elections actually secure, instead of being gaslit by the people in power who say that was the 2020 election was the most secure in American history. That's BS. We all know it's BS, and our poll and our study of our polling results show that.
That statement about the most secure election in American history was such an absurdity. It will make someone want to cry. But one question I have, Jim, what I'm still a little bit puzzled by. Mm-hmm. Why would anyone admit to fraudulent conduct? Here you're conducting a poll. A stranger calls you, right? Mm-hmm. The pollster. I know it's Rasmussen. I know they're one of the most reputable pollsters we have in America. But why would you admit to this, though?
I think it's because you don't realize that what has been asked of you is, in almost every case, a crime.
Oh.
And just to add on to that, Leon, as I was reading the report, it said that a lot of Republicans answered this way too. So it wasn't just Democrats; it was also a lot of Republicans also had, did things that were inaccurate as well on the things. So
that leads into my question for Jim. When they applied these percentages, 21% or 15 or 10. Did they assume that those were percentages of fraud that went 100% toward the Democratic candidate, or was there a fluctuation, some way of figuring out that some of those people would probably be fraudulently voting for a Republican?
Right. We actually did account for that. Many of the states, those 6 states that we targeted for analysis, and for good reason, because those are the ones that decided the 2020 election, often very narrowly, we were able to get specific data from some of the states in how many mail-in ballots came in, and how many mail-in ballots came in from Democrats, and how many mail-in ballots came in from Republicans. And then in places where states did not track that data specifically, we went with AP polling results that polled voters on how many mail-in ballots they did and who they voted for. So we did account for that. I mean, you would, as you might imagine, and it's in the report, in most states, the mail-in ballots for Biden vastly outnumbered the ones for Trump by huge amounts. I think Wisconsin, it was something like, I'd have to look for it. I should have known it off the top of my head, but it was something like 3 or 4 to 1. It was just an enormous disparity in the number. So yeah, that's accounted for, and that's what makes this thing so shocking. And again, as we kept ratcheting it down, it was like, well, how low is this going to go? And frankly, only at 5% or 4%. And again, this is in the report. If you were to scroll down, at 5% and 4% fraud, it's actually a tie, and the House of Representatives gets to decide who's president. And they would have chosen Donald Trump, because Republicans would have had that majority. Only at 3% or lower of 3% of fraud or less is Joe Biden reelected president. And again, one of my favorite pages in the report is the page that shows how many, what the percentage of spoiled ballots are. Now, in most elections, people don't know this, but there's all sorts of reasons for a state to reject a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot. All sorts of things like it came in the wrong envelope. It's supposed to come in the certified envelope that you're mailed in. If you mail it in a different envelope, the state throws it away. It's not counted. If it's not signed, they throw it out. It's not counted. If the signature doesn't match, they throw it out. It's not counted. And a lot of those states, the rejection rate for mail-in ballots is something of account. Some states it's as high as 5.5% or 6%. Some states it's only like 2 or 3%. In the 2020 election, with the largest mail-in ballot volume ever in the United States, by orders of magnitude, the rejection rate for mail-in ballots in Wisconsin, for instance, was 0.23%. It is impossible that only 0.23% of mail-in ballots in Wisconsin, with the largest mail-in balloting they've ever had in their life, were rejected. It should have been much higher than that, obviously. Pennsylvania was 1.29%. Arizona was 0.26%. It is absolutely impossible that only 0.26% of mail-in ballots in Arizona were spoiled and shouldn't have been counted, when in normal times it's 3, 4, 5%. So this is really important. We need to fix this. Yeah. People, Molly Hemingway has that great book Rigged on the 2020 election. This is partly how that rigging happened. They threw out all the election rules. A lot of states that had signature verification said there's too many of them. We can't verify. We just have to count them. So they counted them. And we have to, so that cannot happen in 2024. If the American people do not have confidence that their elections are on the up and up, we don't have a country. We have something else, and we have actually a real dangerous situation civically in America.
Well, Jim, there's something I wanted to add on because earlier Leon asked the question. He said, well, it's hard to imagine that some of these people would answer dishonestly if they were, answer that they knew they were breaking the law. But that brings up an important point, because you guys found essentially 1 in 5 where people just didn't realize. What about all the people who were stuffing potentially ballot boxes? And so let me take you guys to a story here. James, maybe you could bring this visual up. In Connecticut, this just literally happened. So when you hear these, you constantly hear these Democrat pundits say, oh, there's never any issues of election fraud. It's just not a thing that happens. You guys are crazy, or you're just, conspiracy theorists. Well, in Connecticut, in a town called Bridgeport, they had a mayor's race where they literally had to throw out the election because the two guys were both engaged, it sounds like, in stuffing the ballot box, both candidates. And we have a news report that I wanted to share with you guys. So, James, can you bring up KOL number 1?
Allegations of absentee ballot fraud in Bridgeport, all after video was leaked showing a woman stuffing envelopes into the ballot drop box. A lot of people have a lot of questions now.
John Gomes' campaign Facebook page shows a woman whom he claims to be a supporter of Mayor Joe Ganim and a City Hall employee stuffing envelopes into the absentee ballot drop box outside the government center a number of times in the early morning hours of September 5th. Gomes lost last week's Democratic primary to Ganim by just 251 votes. On election night, Gomes had a lead thanks to the in-person voting at the polls, but the absentees, which Ganim won by nearly a 2-to-1 margin, pushed him over the top. It should be noted, according to the Secretary of the State's office, only a voter, a designee of a voter who has an illness or a disability, or a family member is allowed to mail or put a ballot in a drop box.
So that was a story that just happened. I mean, this was literally last year's primary, I think, that happened in that area, and they had to throw the whole thing out, and they're going to redo the election, I believe, in February of this year. So they found so many problems with it. So anyways, it's just evidence that this happens, and in this case, it was 2 Democrats because it was a primary.
That's like a battle royale. That's like the World Series of cheating. Democrat on Democrat. God, that's Godzilla and King Kong, man. That's good stuff. Look, joking aside, yes, our survey it was just about people who self-reported doing something either on purpose or by accident, basically in the privacy of their own home. It was not about stuff like ballot box stuffing. It was not stuff like going ballot harvesting in a Republican neighborhood and then throwing all the votes away. We know those sorts of things happen. So this fraud does not include any of that stuff. It's just the stuff from the mail-in ballots by people who admitted, who said they voted themselves in the 2020 election and what they had done. And so, one of the things we say in this report, I really encourage all your viewers and listeners to read it. Just go to heartland.org. It's very easy to find there. It's the first thing we have featured. Is we have like policy prescriptions on how to clean this mess up. And one of them, when I'm watching that video of that lady stuffing that ballot box drop or drop box, I should say, with stuff, do you know what the penalty for something like that should be? 20 years in jail.
Mm-hmm.
It is way, way, way too easy to cheat in our elections because almost nobody's held accountable. Nobody ever cancels the election. That is so rare what's happening in Bridgeport, Connecticut. But the reason cheating is so rampant is because they're almost never caught. And when they're caught, they're never punished. If the penalty for taking away your franchise, with this is all taking away your franchise, not in some vague way. You got to take it personally. Your vote just got canceled by that lady stuffing those things in that ballot box, and that person should go to jail for a long time. That's the only way this stuff's going to stop.
Totally. Yeah. Jim, before we leave this topic, in your study, did you guys look at this whole phenomenon of cured ballots, where we have state officials calling out to people to come in and fix their ballots after it's been cast and that kind of stuff? I find that a very troubling phenomenon, but I don't know if you guys looked into that while you were doing your study.
We did not. That was not one of the questions that we asked, but that's yet another. Yeah, the longer we spend time together on this podcast, the more ways to cheat in an election we're gonna remember and wrench into each other. It's absurd. Remember on election night 2020, we were told by all the left-wing pundits on TV, don't believe the election night results. You have to wait. The election night results are not official and don't count. Go to bed, and when you wake up, we'll tell you who your president is. And a lot of people went to bed thinking Donald Trump was president of the United States and woke up the next day to find out that was probably not going to happen. And then, of course, did not happen. I was on my own podcast, actually, on our own YouTube channel.
Jim, before you go on from that, I just wanted to add in there, when you said, tell them to go to bed and you wake up in the morning, it'll all be wonderful. It almost sounds like what parents tell their kids about Santa Claus.
That's right.
Sorry, I just couldn't resist.
Democrats woke up and found Biden under the tree. What a wonderful morning.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, but just real quick, because I know we're running low on time here. I was reminded the other day that when we liberated Iraq and gave them democracy, everybody remembers those iconic pictures of people putting up their fingers that were dipped in purple ink to ensure that, one, I voted, and two, I can get back in line and come around and vote again. And to think, post-war Iraq runs better elections than the United States of America, which is supposed to be the beacon of freedom and liberty for the world. It's absurd the way we do this, and it's on purpose. I really don't think either side has enough incentive to fix this. Right. But when there's going to be, when the American people do not have confidence in the security and the legitimacy of their elections, if they don't think they're on the up and up, you are playing with very dangerous stuff. And there is no reason for anybody to believe that the 2020 election was as secure and as normal as every other election they've ever had in their entire lives. It was very flawed, and I think very rigged and rife for fraud. And this cannot happen this coming November. We have to fix it state by state.
Sure.
Well, Jim, one of the things I wanted to squeeze this in before we have to break for public access, but so essentially, one of the biggest issues here when you talk about security is the idea that you can ID. Like, for instance, they took the fingerprint, was the one where they put an ink blot on their hands. But here we can't even get voter ID laws in a lot of places. And so I thought it was kind of interesting. There's this gentleman named Ami Horowitz, and maybe we could pull the visual up here real quick, because he did a very funny sort of survey of his own. You guys did your survey, he did his. It was about voter ID. And so I wanted to show just a little bit of this. He essentially went to Berkeley and he asked white people what they thought of voter IDs. And then he went to Harlem and he asked them what they thought of voter ID laws. And it's pretty funny. So James, could you play KOL 2 real quick?
I'm Ami Horowitz, and I'm here in Berkeley, California to find out if voter ID laws suppress the black vote. Opinion on voter ID laws?
Yeah, they're usually pretty racist and they're bad. I think voter ID laws are a way to perpetuate racism.
Would you go as far as say those laws are racist?
For sure.
Do you think it suppresses the African American vote?
Definitely.
Tell us how.
Because they're less likely to have state IDs.
Minority voters are less likely to have the kinds of IDs that have been described or required.
These type of people don't live in areas with easy access to DMVs or other places where they can get identification.
You can always get IDs you do over the internet. Does that also make it difficult for black people in particular?
Yeah, you have to have access to the internet. You have to be able to pay an internet service provider for certain fees.
Do you think that's harder for black people to go online?
Well, I feel like they don't have the knowledge of how it works. A lot of people have.
Okay,
They
so
don't have the knowledge. And take note, eh? Black people like me don't have the knowledge. I want you to take note.
That was literally.
Don't you feel better, Leon, knowing those good people in Berkeley are looking out for you?
Of
just
course.
sit back. Let them take care of you.
They are my saviors. Don't worry. I'm fully acknowledged. I fully acknowledge that they are my saviors. God help us.
Well, that was essentially him trying to say why a lot of these people who do vote for these voter ID law or against rather the voter ID laws, because they say they're racist is what they say. And almost all the time, these are sort of maybe well-meaning, sort of liberal white voters, maybe.
Well-meaning? You call that well-meaning, Jason? Oh, God, please don't. Please don't.
Well, when after we come back from our break, I'm going to show you, because Leon, he gave us his thoughts on this, but there were a lot of other offended people on the other side when he went to a different community and asked them what they thought about those responses, which was just absolutely incredible. But, this is the crazy thing about if we can't verify an ID, how can we even start with voter security, right? Or election security? Did you have, because I know you guys were talking about maybe having notaries potentially for people who were, had to do the absentee voting.
Yeah, I mean, if we are going to have mail-in balloting, and of course the Democrats and the left want to retain mail-in balloting forever. They think it's great, expand the franchise and all that stuff. Okay, we're going to do that. Then you must have your vote notarized. Well, people can't afford to pay for a notary. That's all right. How much money do we spend in the federal government? Make it free. Have the notary put in a voucher to the state to get a refund or something like that. It's easily solved.
I have to break in real quick. So if you're on public access watching us, we have to go away, but you can finish watching this show online and the conversation will go on. And we have other conversations too that we've had in the past with a lot of other people fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. So Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble. So check it out. Okay, well, back to the show. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, can I swear now? Is that okay if I use
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. No, I apologize to your audience who are probably thinking something a little more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah, notarized. I mean, get something notarized. I mean, it can be a pain in the ass, but maybe mailing, if you're going to vote from home, or have mail-in voting, maybe it should be a little bit of a pain in the ass. Maybe it's easier just to go to vote like a regular person. Voting is the most important civic duty an American has. Is it really so hard to leave for work 30 minutes early so you can go to your polling place and vote at 7 a.m? Or if you don't like that, how about I would like to make election day the Saturday after tax day and make it sure that everybody's off, or make it a national holiday, voting day on tax day. I would love that. Let me introduce that bill if I ever get to Congress. But but we can't do what we're doing now. We have to fix this. We have to fix this because our elections are not on the up and up, or I should say, the 2020 election is not on the up and up. I'm 53 years old. I've always felt that every election was fairly run and that the loser lost legitimately and the winner won legitimately. It was only, frankly, in the 2000 election where this has always been questioned, except for twice, 2008 and 2012. It was fine. So, the two Obama elections were just perfect, but everything else has always been questioned. We just can't go on like this as a country. It's going to lead to something very, very bad.
Well, before the rest of you guys comment, hold on, before you comment, I'll let you comment, but let me just show the second half of that Ami Horowitz thing so that we can get through all the material on this topic, and then you can go ahead and say whatever you want on it. So, James, can you bring up KOL number 3, and we'll see what people in Harlem thought of what their protectors in Berkeley were saying about them.
Now I'm here in East Harlem to ask black people their thoughts on what you just heard. Do you have ID normally? You carry ID around?
Yes, I have state ID.
Do you carry ID?
Yes, I do.
Do you know any black person who doesn't carry ID?
No. Everyone that I know has an ID. Why would they think we don't have ID?
That's a lie. Why would they say that?
Do you have ID?
Yes.
Because I have my ID and my friends have their ID, so like, we know what we need to carry around.
Everybody that I know have ID. Like, that's one of the things you need to walk around with New York with, ID.
Do you know any black adult who does not have ID?
No, I don't.
Is it a weird thing to even say that?
Yes, it is.
You know how to get the DMV?
Of course.
You know where it is?
Yes.
You can get there?
Uh-huh.
No problem.
No problem.
Just checking.
Okay.
And I also heard a lot that black people, especially poor black people, have no access to the internet, can't figure out how to use the internet.
That's just stupidity, honestly. Everybody has access to the internet. Even a little kid can figure out how to work the internet.
I had access to the internet for years.
You know how to use it properly, right?
Exactly. I do it at work. So, of course, I know how to use it.
I'm wondering if Democrats are surprised that that woman actually used the internet at work. Anyway, but I mean, this is just, yet another survey of kind of testing these kind of insane theories of Democrats that people somehow we're going to be disenfranchising people by requiring an ID. Anyway, do you guys want to jump in on that before we?
They always try. It really pains me sometimes. I never want to use skin color as a defining characteristic of any human being. Okay, whether it's the skin color of white or the skin color of black, which is my own. But boy, these Democrats make it so damn hard for you to not to call them racist. The only thing that would lead them down this path is the thoughts in their head about we poor black people. Oh God, we need their help. We need to have these poor black people. They don't have to have ID because they don't know how to use the internet. These poor black people, oh God, I feel sorry for them. Let's save them. But black people could do it without being saved by these people. They're nothing but a bunch of racists. That's what they are. Thank you very much. Let them keep their goodwill.
Well, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that the Democrats, now these kids on the campus said some of the most racist stuff I ever heard in my life.
True.
However, but let's just assume that the powers to be in the Democratic Party are not racist whatsoever, or maybe they are, maybe they aren't, doesn't matter. What they want is a continuation of mail-in ballots. So what does having an ID have to do with mailing in a ballot? If you walk up to a ballot place where you're going to place a ballot in person, and you go up there and you have to show ID, okay, there. But that's not the issue, because Jim, in his own research, found that the problem is not with people walking in with or without an ID and punching chads on a ballot. That's not the issue. The issue is these mail-in ballots. So what in the world would an ID have to do with that? Because they're still going to, they're still going to be able to mail it in. You don't know who it came from. It could have been, like when I was married, my former wife would just say that, just go ahead and mark what you want me to vote on, and I'll just go in and vote on that. And she walked in and voted on that. That was probably fraud too. But anyway, so I got 2 votes for the price of one back then.
Admitted to fraud, Tim. Okay.
Yeah, I just admitted to fraud. Okay, put the cuffs on, lock me up.
So, hold on.
Yeah. The NSA is
All the
already
cops.
the NSA already heard that confession.
Oh, okay.
But the thing is, what would the and hey, I'm in favor of ID in a ballot polling place. Yes, for sure, I am in favor of that. However, that's not where the issue is. The issue is with the mail-in ballots. What are we going to do about that, Jim? What's the problem? What's the solution?
Well, I mean, the solutions that we put forth in the paper, it's things like the states need to update and verify their registration rolls, their election registration rolls annually. In other words, purge off the dead people, purge off people who are no longer at a certain residence. We mentioned that we would like to have voter ID, but that's when people vote in person. And in fact, states should encourage people to vote in person. In most states, in most Western democracies, France, for instance, doesn't have any mail-in voting, and it's actually extremely difficult to get an absentee ballot in France. Their attitude basically is, if you can't work it out so that you can vote on election day, you don't get to have a voice in the government this year. You should work that out. And we mentioned the notary thing, and we also say, as we used to have in this country, that there needed to be a valid excuse to cast something by mail. But we should also outlaw ballot harvesting for both parties. That should not be allowed. That is talk about one of the main problems, guys, with a mail-in ballot is that you lose, obviously, what do they call it? Custody. You lose track of who has custody of that ballot. And when you send party operatives out to collect ballots, are you kidding me? That's what we do in this country. We allow that to go on in this country. Right. That's absurd. When you go vote in person, when I go to vote here in Illinois, it's a reader. You fill out the lines, and then you feed it in, and it reads it, and then you see what your votes were. Then you hit confirm. But the ballot's in my hand the entire time, so I have secure custody of my vote for the 15 minutes it takes me to vote in most elections. But if I mailed in my ballot, I put it in the mailbox. I have no idea where the hell that went. I could have dropped it by accident on the road on the way up the street. Some guy could have come and stolen it out of my mailbox. I mean, it's absurd. We should all be voting in person, but if we're going to do mail-in ballots, it should be very limited, and it should be in a way that validates the custody as much as possible of that ballot. And we don't have anything near that today. And nobody in this country seems to want to talk about that, and that we need to fix it.
Indeed.
Well, in a way, can I just play devil's advocate? In a way, when you punch the chads out of a face-to-face ballot and you put it in the ballot box, from that point in time, you lose custody of it. And that ballot box is then taken somewhere. I don't know what they do with it, but somebody has to count it. So somebody's pulling it out of the box, and they're putting it into a machine, I'm assuming, that's counting it. I don't know. I lost possession. I didn't take my Chad punched ballot and stick it in the machine to be counted myself. So
true. But there are election polling place monitors from both parties that watch that stuff. I mean, obviously you can't have absolute 100% certainty, but we can get as close as possible. Except for when they board up the windows, with other than that, we get to watch them count it, but that's the ideal.
Yeah.
This mail-in ballot stuff is so fraudulent and so filled with holes, literally with holes. It's unbelievable. And if I can just tell you a personal story as to why I truly believe we should ban this mail-in ballots, except in the most extraordinary cases and circumstances. In 2020, I moved from one place to another within the state of California. Do you know what happened to me? I got ballots in both places. The state of California mailed me a ballot in the house that I moved from, and then mailed me a ballot in the house that I moved to. Well, of course, Leon, try to be honest, I only voted in one of them, which was the house I had moved to. But this, I am sure I am not unique in any stretch of imagination. I'm sure this happened to a lot of people in California. And this is the kind of corruption and the kind of fraud that can happen and does happen with these mail-in ballots. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I certainly agree, Leon. That's definitely one of the things I think even your report said is that I think that some people were getting ballots in multiple places might have been one of the issues too, right? So, yeah. But anyways, so that's definitely an issue. But one of the things that this, the results of that 2020 election brought us a lot closer to was the prescription to the World Economic Forum.
Oh my!
So in case
I don't know if I have enough. We may have to take another break. I may need refill to get through the WEF portion, but we'll see.
Okay. Well, it'll certainly make you want another drink. But James, maybe you could bring up the visual here. So, in case you're not familiar with the World Economic Forum, this was an article by somebody, but it had a quote here that said they really believe you'll be happy. This was a sort of a critique of them, but it all comes from this. I guess idea of this stakeholder capitalism and these other ideas of this sort of complete sharing economy that they're imagining, collectivism, I guess, through these ideas of their founder Klaus Schwab, who actually you'll see him in a little bit, but I mean he's almost like a James Bond villain, the way he looks and some of this stuff. Of course, he has a nice affectation, so I guess he, maybe he's able to schmooze a lot of these people. But one of the quotes that came out of this is this idea that you'll own nothing and be happy. That's that's one of their projections for, I believe, 2030. And so, anyways, this stakeholder capitalism really kind of hits the nail on the head of what they're all about. And so, I'm going to put Klaus Schwab in his own words so that we can kind of hear what he's saying. And this is kind of, what the Democrats seem to be sort of pushing us towards. So, James, can you pull up KOL number 4?
Who's best placed at this time to lead the world into the fourth industrial revolution? Because you pretty much created this term.
On the one hand, we have state capitalism. On the other hand, we have shareholder or private capitalism. So it's a clash between two systems. I believe that state capitalism in the short term provides certain advantages because you can mobilize in a concentrated way a lot of resources to reach a specific objective. But I believe that the future is not state capitalism or shareholder capitalism. The future is what I call stakeholder capitalism.
So that was Klaus Schwab in his own words, kind of describing his stakeholder capitalism. And you can hear very clearly he actually kind of thinks state capitalism is the way to go. And that's essentially China. And that's what they were talking about in the longer version of that clip. So he kind of a big fanboy of the Chinese government and the way they handle things. And then, and then he just sort of brushes aside shareholder capitalism, which is essentially saying all the people who actually own the company making decisions. So that's what, shareholder capitalism would be about. But he doesn't really like that. He wants to get to something called stakeholder capitalism. And James, could you pull up the visual on this? This is a picture of his book. So you can see it's titled or it's signed by, or rather it has his name on it, Klaus Schwab. And he envisions that a business has all these different, stakeholders that essentially includes just about everybody when you start looking at some of these things. So it's not really the owners of a company or a resource that make decisions. Now you've got to get input from everybody before you make a decision about what to do with this stuff, which of course winds up just empowering the power brokers in government for the most part, because of course they're going to say that they're speaking for everybody else, when you get to this stuff. And in case you're wondering about how that election, wound up maybe pushing us towards this, I have another video clip I want to show you, and it's from the 20s. Every year they do this World Economic Forum, and so they just had the one about 3 weeks ago, but this one's back from 2016, and I'm going to show you essentially who they had there. Let's see. So James, can you bring up WEF number 5, or excuse me, KOL number 5?
I'm very honored and pleased to introduce the Honorable Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States. I'm so pleased to see you back here in Davos, because I remember before you assumed your position as Vice President of the United States, you came here as a senator, you came here as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, and I have to say, in my memory, you were one of the most engaged and hardest working participants here at the annual meeting.
So there you have Joe Biden, literally on his way out as the vice president, was one of their big speakers there at Davos. And of course, there's all these world leaders from all these different countries. You get people like Trudeau and other European leaders showing up there to bring a lot of this stuff back to their countries. So it's kind of scary. But, it wouldn't be a Joe Biden discussion if he didn't make a flub. And James, can you play KOL number 6 real quick? Because he did say something that's a little bit funny in the speech that he gave there. It's a classic Joe Biden.
Question: how do we guarantee there's net benefit for humanity with an increase in standard of living as a consequence of the changes that some of you, maybe this is a room, this comment wouldn't apply, but where most people can't even imagine? We're going to be flying subsonically at 22,000 miles an hour before long. We're going to be seeing breakthroughs that are absolutely, totally, thoroughly unimaginable a year ago.
And Tim, whether that's a year ago or today, I can't imagine a subsonic plane going 22,000 miles an hour.
Leon, you're the engineer here. Can you fact check that for us?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now. Don't worry, it's coming. Jesus Lord.
We have a pilot here who can.
I couldn't hear a word of it because for some reason, every video you play, I can barely hear it.
Okay, well, whatever, Tim. 22,000 miles an hour subsonic flight is what Biden was saying. So that's essentially what he was.
22,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
22,000.
He said, imagine someday we're going to have that.
Soon.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that Biden doesn't remember that anymore, so he can't be embarrassed by it. But we had to listen to it.
Yeah.
I would think that in a world where the business that made the 22,000 mile an hour airplane would have to be beholden to so many different people that it's going to take a lot longer than soon to have it made, because they're going to be stretched really thin, that business.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of crazy, but Jane, maybe you could bring up this visual. So I kind of want to give you a little more sense of what these guys are focused on. And so aside from climate change, that's one of their big things. But they're also talking about some of their biggest emerging concerns there at the World Economic Forum as well. And of course, number one on that is misinformation and disinformation. So where have we heard that before? And exactly who was trying to get an agency within the Department of Homeland Security to address misinformation and disinformation? Well, I guess it Captain Joe Dementia. Well, yeah. Do you guys have any other thoughts on, kind of what these guys are doing there and kind of the tie-ins and stuff that are going on?
Let's hear we haven't heard from Jim on this. Let's hear from Jim.
Actually, the Heartland Institute, we cover the WEF a lot. We have a separate channel, or the Heartland Institute is our main YouTube channel. We have a second channel called Stopping Socialism TV that I hope your viewers or listeners might check out. We have a regular feature that we call Davos Watch. So we've been all over this for several years. And it's actually the misinformation, disinformation was kind of the theme of the latest meeting in Davos. And they think with the rise of AI and with, I don't know, knuckleheads of liberty being able to say what they feel like saying on open forums, that they have to battle what they consider misinformation or disinformation. And when I hear that stuff, I mean, I think everybody's ears should perk up when they hear that stuff. It's kind of funny to think, well, gosh, since 2020 and that virus of unknown origin that swept the world 3 years ago, the biggest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation were the governments all around the world
Exactly.
starting from China and coming all the way around and including the United States.
Yes.
Yet, if these people have their way, only they get to say what the truth is. And anybody who opposes what the regime in power desires you to know will be classified misinformation and disinformation. And whether it's right or wrong would be irrelevant. In fact, the more right you are, the harder they will label it misinformation and disinformation. So this is actually one of the, I think, really the main battle globally right now is for people and forums to fight off this idea that only official government agents and agencies are allowed to tell you what the truth is. You guys might remember that clip from Jacinda Ardern from down in New Zealand. I think we played it on our podcast, where she stated flat out, the only information you can believe comes from us. And she is one of the most successful Klaus Schwab acolytes. She is a WEF, World Economic Forum graduate of the Young Leaders of Tomorrow. This is like Orwellian Aldous Huxley stuff, but it's real. It actually happens. They train these people at the World Economic Forum and send them out into the world. So that's why you got guys like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. You have Justin Trudeau in Canada. These and Klaus Schwab has stated on the stage how proud he is that so many of his acolytes are ministers all over the world. So yeah, it's absurd, but the scary thing is that they're very serious. And so speak as long as you can, as loud as you can, because who knows how long it'll last.
Indeed. You know, but the funny thing about all of these things, you always notice one thing that all of these people have in common. They always love the central planners. Whether it's the World Economic Forum, and look at the first word in that name, World Economic Forum, central planners. Look at the U.S. government, the federal government, central planning. They want to have an agency that can tell us what is misinformation and disinformation, and they are the biggest bunch of disseminators of misinformation during COVID and during other times. But they always have that one thing in common: central planning.
Yeah.
And this thing, what that guy you're talking about, Schwab or whatever the hell his name is. Look at that guy. He's probably one of the most wealthiest people in the world. But you know what he's saying? You should own nothing and be happy. Yeah. Well, hell, give away all your wealth. You could give some to me, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Give it all away and be happy. Live by your own rules. But this is nothing but that big thing, you know, that wonderful thing they always do. Nothing but a virtue signaling operation to make us a little more poor than we already are.
You may own nothing, but somebody will. Somebody owns it. It's not going to be you, I guess, but somebody will own it. I just one quick one. You know, he's been pushing this for many years now, that somehow shareholder capitalism is evil and stakeholder capitalism is more just and the right way to go. You know, one of the benefits of being a shareholder, even if you only have one or a handful of shares, and say, Jason, you have 1 million shares in this company, I only have a handful. We are still moving forward with the same goal, to increase profits and to make that company better in that way. So in a way, we are actually equal in what we want the outcome to be, and our motivations are the same. Stakeholder capitalism, that's not you and me and you, Leon, and you, Tim. Stakeholders, they're different. They're definitely not you. And stakeholder capitalism is very inequitable. They always talk about equity all the time, but stakeholder capitalism, it's the governments and the leaders and the smart people, the stakeholders who have all the power. You know, that's what's the miracle of free market capitalism, is that it allows everybody to participate and everybody profits.
Well, one of the disturbing things on this too, and if you look at how regulations are crafted and laws are crafted, the lawmakers use that language. They say everybody is a stakeholder with respect to crafting those laws and regulations. Whereas, you know, that's you know, and you can see where, well, everybody sort of does have a stake in what's happening at the Capitol, but what's happening with somebody's business, that's crazy. And they want to try and push that same language with sleight of hand and push shareholders right out the door. And it's scary stuff. But there are consequences to this, and I did want to show real quick what's happening in Europe, because this is not just talking about a bunch of crazy nuts who get together and just kick stuff around. There's real things going on, and so James, well, let's see. First, can you pull up the visual real quick? So. European farmers have been protesting, and they've been protesting in different groups for the last several years, but it's been going hot and heavy for the last few weeks. So we actually have a visual. James, can you bring up KOL number 8? So it's 8. We're jumping out of order here.
Protests that began in France and then Germany have been spreading across the continent. Demonstrations are taking place in Poland, Hungary and Italy today. The farmers venting their anger over soaring fuel and fertilizer costs, low prices for their produce and increasingly restrictive EU regulations. Well, Italy's government has promised tax breaks to ease the hardship for its farmers after hundreds began gathering with their tractors this week on motorways outside of Rome and Turin. And in Cyprus, farmers blocked the entrance to the European Union's offices in the capital Nicosia on Thursday. And there have also been demonstrations in Bulgaria and more tractor protests across Spain for the third day in a row, with farmers disrupting traffic in Barcelona and in other cities all over the country. And there have been renewed talks on an EU trade deal with South America. They've raised anxieties even further.
So you can see that, this is crazy. It's really eating into people's ability to get anything done. And let's hear from a farmer real quick, because that was certainly the news. But a farmer's going to tell us essentially what it's like to be a farmer there. So James, can you go to KOL number 9?
And the vice president of the Farmers Defence Force, he told us why he's unhappy with the EU's agricultural rules.
Well, first of all, of course, it's the administration bureaucracy. Many people don't know, but the European Union tells us what to sow and what to harvest on our fields, and when to sow it and when to harvest this. And they are checking this with live satellite imagery every 3 days all over Europe. So we're being watched by European Union from the satellites every 3 days. They invent legislation to prevent climate change or whatever, but they don't invent rules that change things for the better. We as a practicing farmers see that the rules that the European Union is opposing on us is not helping the environment in any way.
So that's essentially a farmer talking. And of course, they have 2030 goals of like cutting in half the number of pesticides, I think, and maybe fertilizers that they can use, because all these they're saying are tied to climate change. But of course, that means that these guys essentially have to find some kind of a magical way to do all the stuff that they would normally do. They're in a bind, in other words. So Jim, did you have any thoughts on what's happening in Europe?
When I see stuff like this, and I have been watching it pretty closely, it's hard not to think, if you wanted to starve your population and reduce your population, would you do anything any differently? No, this is exactly what you would do. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but these so-called environmental regulations that they're putting on farmers, that they can't use certain fertilizers, which means they can't, and pesticides, which means they really can't grow crops. It's at some point, this magical thinking it runs into reality, right? I mean, it's inevitable. But when it comes to this issue with farming and agriculture and feeding Europe, I mean, it's already bad enough because the breadbasket of Europe for so long was Ukraine. They're out of the farming business right now, guys. They're a little busy. So when you get to this point, you eventually when reality runs into magical thinking, Klaus Schwab is not going to go hungry. The other people are going to go hungry. The rest of us are going to go hungry. The rest of the people in Europe are, and they don't care. And it gets to a point where you think, how would you do anything differently if you didn't want this to happen? Or if you wanted this to happen, if you wanted people to starve, if you wanted people to be miserable, if you wanted their energy bills to be so high they can't afford them, these are the things that you would do. And that's exactly what they're doing. So it hasn't come to the United States quite yet. But we need to keep vigilant and make sure it doesn't.
Yeah. And sadly, given who's in office, I think, Green New Deal stuff and all that, this is just around the corner if we get another 4 years.
Of course. Wendy, if we give Biden another 4 years in his senility, we're gonna have all these wonderful things like the Green New Deal and all these other things. Pretty soon we're gonna have the farmers on the streets. And then we're gonna have people like Justin Trudeau telling us what to do in terms of how to manage the protests out there, because he did a very good job and a very, very good job of handling the truckers' protests in Canada, if you remember. Talk about the violation of rights we saw from those central planners who fed us all the misinformation and then told us how they're going to solve the problem. God help us, really and truly.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, it's it seems insane, but these are the people in power, and I tell you, the not so secret headquarters seems to be the WEF. But there's some otherwise and sort of insane things going on there as well, and that kind of takes us to our Knucklehead Noise Patrol. So James, can you bring up the visual here real quick? So they had an interesting speaker in one where they wanted to hear from an indigenous shaman, I guess, and to hear their perspective on, I guess, their concerns about the world. And this is what we saw in that discussion. So James, can you bring up KNP number 1?
Why should I?
So is this the science behind all this stuff? I'm not sure. What do you guys think about this?
Man, we went from lockdowns and wearing masks to coughing in people's faces and rituals at the WEF in no time. Amazing.
Hey, that's the science.
That's the science. That's right.
These are the people that aim to rule over us. Isn't that nice?
Science does not apply when cultural upliftment is super important. You cannot. Cultural upliftment takes precedent over our science. They can tell us, oh, we have to be 6 feet apart, but when you're at the World Economic Forum, where we want to have all this virtue signaling about cultural upliftment, we could blow in other people's faces. Otherwise, you must stand 6 feet apart. Just remember that.
Well, she was coughing in the faces of her oppressors and just hoping for the best, I guess.
Hey, Jim, I think I'm going to steal that one. I like it. I'm going to steal that one.
That's free. You can have that.
Screaming Eagle, did you have any spiritual thoughts on this one?
Well,
Mike.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was fishing for my thing to turn on the mic. I have learned over the decades that top-down central planners always fail because it's just like any other kind of socialism, communism, all those kinds of economic theories that have small groups of people at the top making all the decisions throughout the economy. It always fails, and it's going to fail in every other aspect that you try to utilize it, such as how to run farmers and how to run anybody. So what will happen is it will fail, and what comes up in the ashes, what rises from the ashes of that, or what areas of technology take off and what individuals do to survive, and instead of starving, historically people have not just sat around and unless they were trapped. I get that in certain economies. Certainly Chairman Mao did away with a bunch of his people and starved them to death right as soon as he got to power. So it's possible, but in a worldwide situation, there's just too many places to run, I think. So I hold hope that these solutions to these problems, whether they're with somebody growing food in their backyard or front yard and sidewalks and every other place or whatever, it's going to happen. And so their whole top-down central planning thing is going to fail, and they're going to be exposed, and off we go.
Well, Tim, I mean, there's no doubt, Tim. There's no doubt they're going to fail. I do not doubt that for 1 second. What scares me is the damage they will do before, from implementation to the point in time we recognize it as the giant failure it will be, is the damage they will do in the process. Let's just look at Eastern Europe from World War II to 1989, to the end of World War II to 1989. Look at the damage that socialism and communists did to Eastern Europe. They're still recovering from it. Well, some have made some good progress, but they're still recovering from it. It's the damage that they will do that is what scares me.
Well, history teaches another thing too, is that stuff takes many, many decades to play out in many cases. So sure. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of damage, but what are we going to do about it? Are we going to stop it? Heck, we can't even get the United States out of Iraq and Syria after, what is it now, 24 years or something like that, being in Iraq. Can't even get us out of there. This kind of stuff is just something we have no control over. We're not going to vote about it. If anything, they're going to vote to have these clowns telling everybody what to do. So, my end-all cynical answer is just let it fall. Just let it collapse, because that's the only way out of it that I see. Hey,
well, Tim, yeah, that definitely sounds like a pessimistic note, but I wanted to end this show on an optimistic note, and one good thing came out of the WEF, and I want to share that with you too. Somehow, he got on the roster of speakers, and somehow Mr. Millay got to come in and talk. And I have a very short clip of that, but I think it's very inspiring that somehow somebody sent out the wrong mailer to him. Because I don't know, because he was not saying what they wanted to hear. James, can you bring up KOL 7?
Today, I am present to inform you that the Western world is facing a significant threat. It is in danger because those who are supposed to defend the values of the Western world are co-opted by a worldview that inevitably leads to socialism and consequently to poverty and economic deprivation. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-intentioned desires to help others and others by the desire to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We are here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world, but rather they are their cause.
So that was Mr. Millay's opening statement when he came on stage. So, and of course, he's the president of Argentina, and we've been following him very close on this show. And by the way, just in case you weren't aware of that, he does not speak English. That was literally AI generated, and that's pretty scary because his lips were moving right along with the word.
Yes.
In that AI generation.
I saw it in the original Spanish, and I was like, that's got to be AI. So I was staring at his mouth, and like, that looks a little off, but not by much. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, very, very, very good. Well, Jim, I don't know if you wanted to give the Heartland a plug one more time. Thanks for coming on the show. And James, maybe you could bring up his page again real quick, just in case he wants to point anything out about it.
Yeah, you can go to heartland.org. Like I said, we've been around as a think tank for 40 years. We do all sorts of research on public policy, from free market environmentalism, fighting back against, the climate alarmists at the WEF and other places. We fight for school choice, for lower taxes, for smaller government, and election integrity right now is our big focus. So you can go to heartland.org. You can read our report. And if you have any questions about it, it's very easy to contact us in that About Us drop down at the website. And great to be on the program, and I'm glad that we were able to talk.
Well, thanks, Jim, for coming back again. And, if you're out there watching us, you can find a lot more conversations, plus the one we had with Jim about a year ago, too. You can go to Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, or Spotify and look for those episodes. And we've had conversations with him and a lot of other interesting people who are fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And if you're watching this before the next week's show, which we're actually going to have Cecil Bohannon on from Ball State University talking about a few things, education standards and stuff. But before you come back to that show, sit down and think about what you can do in your community to push for liberty, because we need everybody in on the fight on this. So thanks again so much for joining us. And until the next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.